We are in principle number 3 in the Pure Love series, and this principle is a tricky one. It's my least favorite in the sense that anything can go wrong. It will during this one, because this principle is called Enter Satan. Everything went really well in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. We had 2 chapters of bliss, and then literally all hell broke loose. Satan showed up on the scene. And so it's important as we begin to look through how humanity is malfunctioning and our need for relationship and all the things that are going on in our lives, to look at what went wrong and why it went wrong, and what God feels and does about that, who God is and how he cares about our situation. So if you open up your notes to the educational piece, I want to go through the Bible verse at the top there, Isaiah 14:12 through 15. I want you to notice in your syllabus that we will have the necessary Bible verses. Even if I don't quote them during the teaching, they're put there for during your discussions and thinking and studying to see the biblical reference for what is being said. Because we're trying to tape quickly, and it's a bizarre thing. Everybody wants all the information of 45 minutes in 10 minutes. And so it's a very hard thing to do both. So what I've endeavored to do is put the Bible verses up from the foundation of it. And there will be Bible verses I will quote here and there, but that's why I don't go through a lot of the long ones, all right? So Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. Says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You've been cast down to the earth, you who were once laid low, the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Wow. Number 15, "But you are brought low, brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit." That's the history of the devil. In my opinion, his best nickname is Jerk. But it's sad because at one time he was a beautiful being. I believe a being that God loved with all his heart, because God is love. But the devil got off track, and he made a decision to leave the place that he had been designed for and try to be God himself. I personally believe if the devil was a healthier God for us, God himself would step by and let him take the role, because God is a humble servant. But the devil is not a good leader, and he is not healthy for our soul. We weren't designed to live in the kind of government that he wants to direct and project. And so God had no choice but to cast him out of heaven with his followers. And that began the plight of the problems that we run into in our lives. At the foundation of our situation is the fall of Adam and Eve. Now I want to say something about that. I wasn't in the garden. Were you? I mean, I was dysfunctioning before I even knew what it was. I was sinning before I could spell it. As we grow older, we discover a lot about dysfunction. And we're malfunctioning and being raised in malfunctioning environments all our lives. And we carry baggage with us. But make no mistake, at the foundation of all that was the choice of this being, Lucifer, Satan, that made a decision that said, I'm going to be God. I want to be boss. And from that, we ran into a bunch of problems. So this section, Enter Satan, I hate it because everything that can go wrong does go wrong in the moment I'm going to teach this. I do not have the time, but if ever you want to get together, I can give you story after story of what happens when we go to teach this section. The devil does everything he can in his might to distract and disturb and disrupt. He does not want you to know the next group of events. He doesn't want you to be aware that he is a deceiver and a liar And that's the only tool he's got. And he uses your fallen state to manipulate you, control you, frustrate you, depress you. He does all of that to be in charge of you. And the way that we get out of that is, first of all, understanding the two kingdoms. And secondly, understanding from where our help comes. I'm a mark of a person that has been being set free. I know what it's like to be in a cage. Well, mine was a straitjacket in a little 6x8 room for 4 years. I know what that's like. We were never designed to be tied up in a straitjacket like that, abused and beaten and confused. But I, more than that, know what it's like to have Jesus Christ pour into my heart and into my life and set me free, not in theoretically, not, gosh, in thought. I'm free. And I wouldn't exchange my past for anything because of what I've learned. I've learned how powerful and loving God is, and that my need to love and to be loved came from the Trinity themselves. And I'm not ashamed to say, you need to love me. That's my design. In fact, if you don't like me, that's really your problem, because God does. And I can say that with a clear conscience and very securely. If God says it's left and you say it's right, who's correct? I've got some good news and some bad news. So if God says, I like her, and you don't, who's wrong? I rest my case. So let's go to the order of events of Satan entering the scene. We have the kingdom, and there's an order of events under number 1 and under the educational piece in this principle. We're going to go through these quickly. I just want you to see what unfolded in big strokes. If you want to go study it on your own, it's found in Genesis chapter 3. You've got the verses there, verses 1 through 13. So these are the order of events. Satan plotted to overthrow God. He failed. Somebody say hallelujah. Can you imagine if he won? You think life is hard now? Pick the worst place on earth that is governed by a horrible dictator. Got the place in, get a place in your mind. How'd you like to live there? As a slave. That's what our lives would be like if the devil won. And I'm very grateful he wasn't bigger and stronger than God. So he plotted to overthrow God. He failed and was cast out to God's kingdom, of his kingdom by God. So the devil, he's kicked out. Then God goes on and he creates Adam and Eve. And then he gives them his authentic authority. That means valid authority, authority that comes from him to govern by humbly serving. I find it incredible to know that Adam and Eve didn't have one selfish thought in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Everything was, no, let me do that for you. We don't even know what that looks like. I mean, when you're out there in the world, right, everybody is just saying, no, it's about you. It's not about me. If so, I'd like to, the only place that it might be close is Disneyland, but I don't have the ability to unpack that tonight. I think Disneyland is the closest place to heaven on earth, but we'll leave that be. Letter B under number 1, Satan set a new plan to take control of God's kingdom through deceiving Eve and convincing her to disagree with God. He knew that if he was going to get control, if he was going to be in charge, he knew that he couldn't beat God, yes or no? Already tried that, didn't work. But Eve, a little easier. So he knew that if he could get Eve to disagree with God the way he had, she too would malfunction and he would be in charge of her. I'm finally boss of something. When my children were little, my son Roy wanted to be the boss of something. We finally let him be the boss of the fish. You know, he wanted to be the boss of my husband, and we went through a long thing on that. And what about the dog? No, you don't like the dog being boss of him. It's not a good idea. Well, what about the fish? Well, that ended up a failure too. He fed him a Big Mac and killed all the fish, which makes you wonder what's in a Big Mac, but we'll leave that alone. Dead fish all along the tank. So Satan is finally a boss. He's boss of Adam and Eve because he's deceived them. He plotted to get Eve to disconnect. So he cozied up to her. And then he convinced her to disobey God. God had said, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It'll kill you. It'll hurt you. It's not a good idea. A little worse than poison ivy here. Don't touch it. And so the devil knew if he could get Eve to touch that and eat that, that disconnection would buy for him control over her. And that's all he wanted, was to be in charge. And so what did he do? He did. He deceived her, and her connection to God disappeared. It was a very tragic day. I think probably God cried pretty heavily. C in your notes. By disagreeing with God, Eve broke the covenant relationship, disconnecting, and she now malfunctioned. Disconnection from God equals malfunction, even today. You want to function healthfully, then we need to help you learn how to connect to God fully. Not intellectually, but fully. We'll talk about that later. So when that happened, Eve's situation became really bad. She lost her healthy soul. And the soul, what did we learn in the last 2 lessons? The soul is the communication center. If you are a being that needs relationship, God gave you as a being a soul that has the capacity to connect and relate. So it's important that that piece is healthy. Wouldn't you agree? It's like if you had a car and one of 2 things was going to malfunction, the radio or the engine, which would you choose? The radio. That we can get by down the road without a radio, but the engine gone is kind of a problem. Well, the devil went for the engine of the car. And that's the soul. And she malfunctioned. Letter E, or D, I'm sorry. Eve convinced Adam to disconnect, and he also malfunctioned. So then Adam followed suit. His connection from God disappeared. And now he malfunctions. It's getting ugly fast. And because they've malfunctioned, they're going to have more problems now. Because there's nobody healthy there to relate to the other. Here becomes a problem. You get one unhealthy person and you have a table of healthy people, they can help that person. But if you have all unhealthy people, what hope do we have now? And I think that's why Jesus came. Jesus was healthy. We needed somebody healthy. Does that make sense? And so we find that Adam and Eve, because of their situation, because they had malfunctioned, now we go to the next letter, letter E. Adam and Eve's malfunction disabled them. They can't live in healthy relationship according to their original design. It isn't they don't want to. They cannot. If you listen to the movies and the music and culture today, they're all screaming for wonderful, no strings attached, I love you. The movies all end that way, but in real life, is that how it works? But have you noticed how it sells? Everybody wants it. Everybody wants this wonderful love relationship with other people where nothing goes wrong. That's not reality. But is it reality? I think it is reality. See, it's not our reality, and that's why we're sick. We are designed for that to be our reality. That's a powerful thing to understand. So in this situation, now their intellect, instead of being healthy and able to communicate and gather data and function, is full of pride. Pride saying, it's all about me. I don't need your help, thanks. Me, myself, and I can take care of it. Thank you very much. Their emotions are selfish. This is all about what I want, how I feel, where I want to be. This is not the humble service that God had in mind. And then finally, their will is rebellious. And they're in this horrible, horrible place of now, because of all of that, they can't relate to each other. So now their connection disappears. So now you've got a fish out of water. If you imagine that the pure love that God designed us to live in is a pool of water, and you're a fish, you swim around in this, you're healthy. If you take the fish out of the water, what's going to happen? It's going to malfunction. It's going to die. It's going to flop around and then die. You take a human soul out of relationship, guess what it does? Exactly what the fish does. It malfunctions with depression, anger, addiction. We can make a list. It is the result of being without the relationship we're designed for. It's a horrible situation to be in. So let's go to last letter under number 1, letter F. God's kingdom on the earth was replaced by the kingdom of darkness. And creation malfunctioned, falling into a state of dysfunction and confusion. And doesn't that describe our world today? All of creation fell. The Bible says that creation is groaning, waiting on the sons of man to be redeemed. So we live in a place that we were never designed for. You know, years ago, we had 7 children in our family, and I just say my poor mother, she was a saint before she got to heaven. And my oldest brother went through his teenage years, you know, where, oh joy, oh rapture. And he got really mad at my mother one day, and he said, you know, I never asked to be born. My mother gave him the best answer I've ever heard. She said, well, honey, you weren't exactly what I had in mind either. Well, I think that sometimes we want to scream at God, I didn't ask for this. Have you ever felt that way? I didn't want this. And I'm not allowed to kill myself. Bummer. I mean, there's no way out. Have you ever felt that way? Oh, you're so holy. Have you felt that way today? There's a part of us that wants to shout, this wasn't what I was designed for. And I really believe if you could hear the Father's heart, you'd say, well, honey, this isn't what I had in mind either. God doesn't have this in mind for us. He looks at every rejected soul here, and he weeps. He never designed us to go through all the stuff we've suffered. And he's here as a humble servant wanting to help. So we find that this kingdom that malfunctioned, the unity is the problem. The unity is gone. And because the unity is gone, the authentic authority that God gave Adam and Eve, that disappears. And now instead of having the kingdom us, we have the kingdom of me. And what do you suddenly have? 2 distinct kingdoms that are exact opposites of each other. The devil came along, and this is number 2 under your paper. And it forms 2 forms of government. That's what we have suddenly. Because of what the devil did, we have now 2 forms of government. It was not that way in Genesis 1 and 2. And I cannot imagine to have never lived with any selfishness inside myself. What do you think that would be like to not think of yourself ever that way? Wouldn't that be freedom? Just to be able to say, this isn't about me. I love you. What a powerful thing that would be. How often do we catch ourselves trying not to behave that way? So let's look at these 2 kingdoms. We're going to look at them more closely in the next lesson, so I just want to introduce them. God's kingdom, A, okay? This kingdom is a kingdom of love governed by humble service. That's kingdom A, okay? Kingdom A, God's kingdom, is a kingdom of love governed with humble service. Then we have the other kingdom, the kingdom governed by the devil, kingdom B. And kingdom B, Satan's kingdom, is a kingdom of fear, manipulation, and it's governed by dictatorship. Now I have just one question for you. Which kingdom do you want? A. You know, we have 2 curtains, A and B. Which curtain would you like? You see what I'm saying? That's what pure love is about. That, in a nutshell, is what this whole 12 lessons is going to be about. Defining both kingdoms, letting you see which one you're really living in, and then helping you to decide which one you really want to be in. And if you want kingdom A, we have a path to freedom. I'm a proof of that. I'm free. That's my proof. I can take you back to people that remembered when I was not. In fact, you can find Laura Hicks in this building. She can tell you a whole bunch. Okay? So what I want you to do is take these two kingdoms and what I've taught, and for the next 45 minutes or so, discuss it with one another. You've got questions there under the accountability piece, and really tear into it and discuss the two kingdoms and where we live and what's going on. Okay? Amen.